Tonight, we journey back to a time when life was slower, scratchier, and considerably more sting-prone. You're standing barefoot in a muddy lane, the air thick with wood smoke and manure, and somewhere, uncomfortably nearby, a low, ominous hum begins. It's not just any hum. It's the kind that makes animals twitch, children cry, and grown men perform frantic gestures involving herbs and whispered Latin. That hum belongs to bees, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Your heart skips a beat. You're not just observing tonight. You're participating. That's right. You're the beekeeper now. And not the charming kind with tidy hives and Instagram-worthy veils. No, you've landed smack in the middle of a 14th century village where a suit is really just a heavy wool tunic, a strip of linen tied around your head, and an armful of blind courage. You can already feel sweat prickling under your armpits, and not just because wool in summer is a bad idea. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how far this sleepy little corner of history reaches. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward through the village, your boots squelching through muck and who knows what. Chickens scatter underfoot. A woman stirs a pot of something unidentifiable and gives you a pitying look. She's seen you. She knows what you're about to do. The hives, or more accurately, skeps, sit beyond a low stone wall, nestled among nettles and wildflowers. They look like oversized woven baskets tipped upside down, which is exactly what they are. There's no wooden box with neat slats here, no beekeeper's veil, no smoker with a stainless steel nozzle, just a pile of smoldering dung and straw torches and a small prayer. Fun fact: medieval villagers believed bees were connected to the divine. Some thought they hummed in tune with the music of the spheres. Others swore that bees could detect moral corruption. That's right. If you're a little too greedy or too lustful, the bees know. You pass a wooden sign, etched with a crude image of a buzzing insect and a warning in Latin you can't read. It may as well say, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." The buzzing intensifies. You grip your burlap-wrapped bundle tighter, your version of protective gear, and glance skyward, hoping the overcast weather makes the bees sluggish. It doesn't. You reach the edge of the apiary. The hives are alive with movement, like breathing, churning organisms. Bees stream in and out of the skeps in squiggly arcs. Some hover with what feels like judgmental intensity. You take a shaky breath. Here's a historical gem to hold on to. In medieval Europe, especially in monasteries and isolated farming villages, beekeeping wasn't a quirky hobby, it was critical. Honey was one of the few available sweeteners, and it didn't spoil. Wax was essential for candles, which were themselves essential for liturgical rituals and basic visibility after sunset. If you ran out of beeswax, you weren't just in the dark, your soul might be in peril. And that made you, the beekeeper, someone oddly both revered and avoided. Revered for supplying God's wax, avoided because, well, bees. Here's something scholars still puzzle over: whether medieval people truly understood the bee life cycle. Records from monastic apiculture suggest remarkable observational skill. Yet, the belief that hives had kings instead of queens endured well into the Renaissance. Was it a simple failure of biology, or a deeper reflection of patriarchal worldview? Historians still argue whether this king bee myth was dogma or just harmless ignorance. But you're not thinking about that now. You're focused on not hyperventilating. A village boy shouts something from across the field. You wave back weakly. The torch in your hand sputters, sending a thin ribbon of smoke into the air. You shuffle closer. And then you feel it. The first one. A light, almost ticklish thup against your cheek. Then another on your hand. A bee lands, strolls casually across your wrist, then lifts off like a fuzzy helicopter. A few more follow. Congratulations. You're officially in the bee zone. You try not to swat. That would be blasphemy. Or at least idiocy. Swatting invites anger. Anger invites stinging. And you really, really don't want that. A village elder watches from a distance, arms crossed. She nods solemnly, as if to say, "Yes, child, feel the panic." You raise the smoking bundle, wafting it near the skep's base. It doesn't look like much, but the smoke signals the bees to gorge on honey and retreat into the hive. Theoretically, you whisper something unintelligible, half prayer, half plea. Behind you, the cows moo disinterestedly. This is your job now. You're not an adventurer, not a knight, not even a monk. You're a humble, anxious, soon-to-be welt-covered beekeeper. And this is only the beginning. The suit you're wearing is about as comforting as wrapping yourself in an itchy wool curtain during a fire drill. There's no zipper, no mesh, no reinforced gloves, just layers of coarse fabric held together with twine and hope. The linen cowl around your head barely keeps the bees from getting curious about your ears. You've tucked your sleeves into your gloves, which are really just repurposed gardening mitts, and your ankles are tied shut with bits of twine to prevent any six-legged infiltration. You shuffle forward, stiff as a scarecrow. Your breath fogs the inside of the veil's cloth as the sun pushes through the haze. Somewhere beneath the hood, sweat beads down your neck and makes its way into your shirt. A bee bounces off your chest. Another lands on your gloved finger. You hold perfectly still, heart thudding like a war drum. Then, with all the grace of a medieval moonwalk, you move in on the hive. Here's your first real task: harvesting honey. You thought it would involve a gentle tug and a satisfying golden ooze. Instead, it begins with you using a crude hooked knife to lift the lid of the skep. Carefully, delicately, as if trying not to disturb a sleeping bear. Bees erupt like steam from a kettle, and suddenly you're the most interesting object within 10 meters. The smoke is your only friend. You waft it gently into the hive entrance, though gentle might be generous. You're shaking like a leaf in a storm. The smoke makes the bees think there's a fire, so they begin gorging on honey in case they need to flee. Stuffed bees are sleepy bees, you hope. But not all the bees buy it. Here's the thing no one told you. Even if you're careful, even if the smoke works, the suit doesn't make you invincible. And in medieval times, it barely made you plausible.
Beekeepers often wore what they had on hand, heavy wool for its thickness, with layers of linen underneath. Veils were sometimes made from horsehair netting, or not worn at all.
Now, for a fun little tidbit, some beekeepers believed in smearing themselves with mud or dung as extra protection. Supposedly, the smell discouraged bees. Whether that worked or not is anyone's guess, but you're starting to wonder if that woman with the pitying look was actually trying to help by holding a bucket of fresh manure. You slice into the comb, thick, warm, sticky, and immediately regret everything. Honey drips over your hands. It coats the knife. It gets onto your gloves. A drop trickles down your forearm beneath the cuff, and now the bees are interested again. One lands on your lip. You freeze. You inhale through your nose. You exhale like you're blowing out birthday candles in slow motion. Too slow. The sting hits you just above your upper lip. The pain is sharp, electric. Your eyes water. You yelp and drop the comb. A piece of it hits your foot with a wet slap. The sting starts to swell almost instantly. Your lips feel like you just lost a bar fight with a rose bush. You stagger backward, trying to keep the smoke steady, but your vision is blurry, not from the pain, but from panic. You now understand medieval apiarists on a spiritual level. These people weren't brave. They were either desperate, drunk, or just profoundly resigned. Historians still argue whether medieval beekeepers were specially trained members of the village or just unlucky peasants with strong constitutions and fewer allergies. Some evidence points to monks being especially skilled, keeping detailed records of hive behavior and honey yields. Others say beekeeping was a shared task, handed down without ceremony from one fool to the next. Your lip pulses. Your knees wobble. Somewhere behind you, a rooster crows like it's laughing. And just when you think it can't get worse, you sneeze hard. The bee veil shifts. A tiny gap opens near your neck. You don't notice until it's too late. One, maybe two bees zip inside. You feel their delicate alien tickle against your collarbone. Time stops. You hold your breath. You whisper to no one in particular, "Please don't." Your only option is to slowly, painfully back away. The smoke is still puffing. The bees are still gorging. But the invaders under your veil, they're explorers now, adventurers, and you're their map. One makes its way to your jawline. You walk backward, then faster, then, abandoning all pride and pretending no one's watching, you run. You bolt past the nettles, through the stone wall gap, and straight to the water trough. With a splash that alarms several ducks, you dunk your head. There's spluttering, thrashing, flapping. Eventually, silence. When you surface, soaked and disheveled, the bees under the veil have drowned or fled. You're panting. You're dripping. You're 85% sure you look like a cursed scarecrow, and it's only mid-morning. Congratulations. You've survived your first sting. Maybe not with grace, but with most of your dignity intact. Well, some dignity. One of the village boys is miming your water dive for the others. They cheer. You tip your head forward, water streaming off your nose, and remind yourself just 12 more hives to go. You're back at the apiary, squelching slightly with each step. The wet wool clings to your skin in all the wrong places, and the welt on your lip has blossomed into something that could rival a plum. But there's no time for self-pity. You're behind schedule, and the bees do not wait. Now comes the part where, in theory, the smoke becomes your ally. The villagers refer to it reverently, as though it's some kind of mystical spell, equal parts science and superstition. You've been handed a fresh bundle of smoldering herbs, bound tightly with twine, and the aroma is pungent, earthy, maybe a bit singed goat hair. You wave it near the hive with exaggerated care, trying not to choke. In the Middle Ages, smoking the bees wasn't just a tactic, it was a ritual. The smoke confused the colony, dulling their alarm pheromones. But people also believed it calmed the bees' souls. That's right, souls. You're not just pacifying insects, you're engaging in a spiritual negotiation. Some apiarists would even whisper blessings while wafting the smoke, half prayer, half apology. You murmur something vague under your breath, part hymn, part desperate plea, then step in again. The bees thrum louder this time. It's not just a sound anymore, it's a sensation. You feel it in your chest, in your teeth, in the aching corners of your spine. A buzzing world surrounds you, and once more, you're acutely aware of just how unprotected you are. The suit doesn't cover your back very well, and the hem flaps suspiciously near your calves. You tighten the twine. Bees don't need much of a gap. They're little opportunists with wings. And here's a historical gem to savor. In some regions, smoke wasn't the only method. Beekeepers believed bees could be calmed with music, soft pipe tunes or humming. There's even mention of singing monks who swayed gently as they tended the hives, convinced that the rhythm soothed the swarm. Scholars still argue whether this practice had any measurable effect or was simply a placebo for anxious beekeepers. Either way you find yourself humming tunelessly, it couldn't hurt. Suddenly, a local woman approaches. She's carrying a bundle of wild herbs, thyme, lavender, and crushed rosemary, and tucks it into your belt without explanation. For sting luck, she mutters. Sting luck? You decide not to question it. Then come the charms. Oh, the charms. A hunched old man sidles up and taps your shoulder with a crooked finger. Say this, he whispers. Say, buzz not, bite not, by St. Ambrose's light. You repeat it, slightly bewildered. He nods approvingly and totters off. Medieval beekeepers had a laundry list of sayings to charm the bees, incantations blending Christian saints with pagan superstition. Saint Ambrose, patron saint of beekeepers, was believed to have had bees hover over his cradle as an infant, a sign of divine eloquence. Hence he became a favorite for whispered prayers. You whisper again, buzz not, bite not. Miraculously, or perhaps coincidentally, the bees seem calmer. You reach into the hive, guided by instinct and the vague instructions of someone whose only advice was, don't drop it. You lift out a chunk of comb, glistening, golden, and heavy with honey. It drips slowly, the sticky sweetness catching the morning light. It's mesmerizing, a slow-motion reward. But then you notice something crawling across it. Not a bee, something else, something long. Something wriggly, a wax moth larva. You gag quietly. Fun fringe fact. Wax moths were the beekeeper's bane. They invaded hives, tunneled through wax, and laid eggs by the hundreds. Some apiarists believed the presence of these larvae indicated a curse, or worse, a punishment from God for mishandling the bees. The remedy? Burn the entire skep, all of it, bees included. You're really hoping that's not today's lesson. You scrape the larva off with a stick and keep moving, gently loading the honeycomb into a clay-lined basket. Bees still crawl all over it, but you try not to flinch, or think, or breathe. In the distance, church bells toll. It's noon, and the village breaks into activity. Children chase a goat. A woman sings while pounding laundry. But you remain here, in the slow, humming world of bees and smoke and itchy linen. One of the monks from the abbey passes by and offers you a thumbs up. You're not sure if that's encouragement or a signal that your robe is riding up in the back. Either way, you smile. Well, you try. The sting on your lip has evolved into a sentient being. Historians still puzzle over just how much beekeepers understood about hive structure. They clearly observed colony behavior, and some manuscripts even hint at an understanding of comb orientation and brood cycles. But without microscopes or formal education, much was left to myth. One surviving text suggests that bees could, quote, smell sin on a man's breath and respond with wrath. You pause and wonder if your breakfast of onion porridge was a mistake. Finally, with the honey safely stored, you back away from the hive like someone disarming a magical bomb. You blow out the smoke bundle and sink down onto a nearby stone. Your arms ache, your face throbs, you smell like singed rosemary and terror. But you did it. You harvested honey. You survived the smoke, the stings, and the superstitions. Then there, for now, you're beginning to understand why medieval beekeepers looked so weathered. It's not just the smoke, or the stings, or the heavy robes that somehow make summer even worse. It's this moment, the slow, creeping dread of approaching the next hive, because now you know what can happen. You eye the skep with growing suspicion. This one is even larger than the first. Its woven surface is darker, tougher, almost glossy with age. A well-established colony. Congratulations. You've been assigned the angry hive. With smoke bundle lit and prayer whispered twice just in case, you shuffle toward it, arms trembling. The hum here is deeper, heavier, a kind of bass drone that vibrates in your ribs. You can already feel the bees watching you, sizing you up like tiny aerial bouncers. One of the villagers stands nearby, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Maybe he's impressed. Maybe he's already digging your grave in his mind. You waft the smoke, the bees pour out, not retreating, just emerging. You hesitate. The bees don't. They begin to swarm. The sensation is immediate and overwhelming. Wings brush your cheeks, tickle your ears, thrum against your chest. It's like stepping into a snowstorm made of fuzz and fury. You try not to flinch, but your body betrays you. A single twitch and one brave bee seizes the opportunity. Sting! Right on the knuckle. Pain like fire. Your fingers go numb. You grit your teeth and don't scream, but a guttural sound does escape, something between a hiss and a very panicked cow. And here's where things take a turn for the spiritual. A nun appears. No, really. From the abbey down the hill, Sister Alwina arrives, carrying a beeswax candle and a sprig of yarrow. She blesses the hive by circling it 3 times, murmuring verses that sound suspiciously like folk charms sprinkled with scripture. She hands you the yarrow for calming, she says, though it's unclear whether she means the bees or you.
I'm wondering is hard. So now look like him. He thinks so. Shandy bomb. Just when I started to be always had the good money. I was looking to the coupons of the batting. London, like has started in mixed names. Is it we've the I middle just no I can't you but that like it's the party I'm sure it is the worst they have we should say long you're back living in fine blood you want her once Miss Lee is like a monkey when I let at his hands the old iron land that they can control the east going on and kasi kali look over to how bad your offices desert all 3 is the weather shooters and just for just yeah is a million with that's so I said I am why you my I am but today I'm friends delight oh first one never be doing not just get any but maybe yeah the other things I'm in the then you get there is nobody can do it it's something shit it's stepping off the remember if I was quest ill the group was gonna think it's on order well you're too oh you please with what you want just all your much come this certain despite water like I'm like this is being made find a lot of came on maybe for look like what name me situation to my start looking what like all the chrome we level is lifting correct out of by the rich more and the came in a little bit and don't why are you hearing me I've been shaggy for thing to do will it in the art and the curtain is never any that the mayor and into it got the man all crows what bad it's the that speak about but and teach it darling I'm asking the things of the whole terror and hearing the game things the couple is whole mall and when all you and by right now has I have a brother you have to place my we have which was means world what was couldn't they might think of them because it's anywhere up pushing a little bit or hey rain and darn it's just which is you living in all but that is like him and easier inside me or so which you gave it with that muscle yeah but overnight I'll be better for okay yeah but it's not a good thing and Zerlane is what is right but from got tenor but high speed look at it make that one now is that it's been I get the wrong way to go we're in them change the show we'll watch because I mean game you want got this one that in the first video there will be blowing right but here evidence I am dear let's lower the word machine when she's Paul Harbor like polar and then says she's with me in air perfect I'm sure I'm not nice back I don't live area and start they just fake you know they call it that's serving you we are in exactly you know on the come the word it's common no wing but that's rare like the English speaking so some girl that way never what is I was finished reading from talking this I want to what's nothing work hold you the beast making no good then belay you actually nine work oh they army that person level marks and they think that's on listen to you and correct thing not fine but I mean I can jar is stay right here hanging on the same let's get on here lucky day shine to get all right no they're green missing the dancing here sometimes make just looking at pick their speaking that you know face there when there's the winging they make actually was watching nine and press don't think that is green but isn't about where came I want Jesus bully again lives so came by a chat he's the same I'm my brain is the wishes meeting to I always was made Sarah like just I'm not making that to a single liter spread that thing there which man what did you go for this also the rules bring that me what's in life we're almost done we'll wing it passing this is the best we could should the police is a little bit sure so with all the best we stay it's a mere Edward Lamar three guy on invite I'm going to middle of the certified and the first for me made him they work to me this I'm going to keep through it we're pretty well damn into so much song and that's Trevor because we're looking there's enemy board are in front of the words just make and looking our children rule I see Rebecca to read up and we watch or not from Grubber and Bridge to get them a band rights to almost I mean and a different band more than called and that's my arts and mix I spent you is the same I didn't mix I run record Mr. High of the name is smash just cringe for and now means now I meant sorry I'm in dang for the air that's I'm dealing because you believe I all in charge now I'm the same to my anywhere else I'm with there is actually been hacked my interest they let that he actually there but the things America I'm sorry all that which look at that sterling I mean it's very hard to be where there's a lot of here man is very rich and so you might have room with 2 bars all 3 but this should be others
and Sister Alwina she's a reminder that the line between apiculture and liturgy was fuzzy at best. You take the yarrow, tuck it behind your belt, and prepare to reach into the hive again. The honeycomb is heavier this time, thicker, darker, with the scent of wild herbs and ancient wood smoke. You manage to extract a full wedge without dropping it, a minor miracle. The bees, though agitated, seem more focused on the nun than you. You wonder if they recognize her. You wonder if you should be wearing a habit. As you step back, something strange catches your eye. In the center of the skep, beneath the upper thatch, there's a small figure carved into the straw, barely visible. It's a crude face, smiling. You point. The villager nearby shrugs. Old charm, he mutters, keeps the hive happy. There are stories, whispers really, that some beekeepers hid talismans or charms in the skeps. Little carved saints, pieces of bone, even dried herbs sewn into the lining. Was it superstition, tradition, insurance? Historians don't agree. Some argue it was a survival tactic, a way to bring control to something utterly wild. Others claim it was part of a larger spiritual system where every hive had a guardian. You try not to dwell on it. You've got honey to collect and, possibly, mild anaphylaxis to avoid. By now your hands are sticky, your eyes sting from the smoke, and your left leg is vibrating with the memory of a bee that almost got under your rope. You haven't sat down in hours, but this strange dance of smoke and sting, of superstition and survival, is becoming weirdly hypnotic. Until you spot a problem. At the edge of the apiary, one of the skeps has slumped sideways. Its base is cracked. The bees inside are pouring out, not in their usual slow, elegant dribble, but in a chaos of zigzag flight. Something has disturbed them. You approach cautiously. Then you see it. A badger print in the mud. Fresh, deep. Badgers, it turns out, are no friend to bees. They love honey, and they're not above digging into a skep and devouring the brood, wax, and comb in a single sitting. No wonder this hive is in disarray. You signal for help, and 2 villagers come running. Together you lift the damaged skep, recenter it, and brace it with a wooden stake. It's messy. More bees spill out. You get stung again, twice, but at this point it's almost comforting, like old friends saying hello. Third sting catches you on the neck. Less friendly. Definitely not platonic. You retreat. Somewhere in the distance, the nun lights the beeswax candle and leaves it at the abbey's doorway. A small offering. Maybe even a thank you. Beginning to think the bees might deserve it. You slump against the stone wall, rubbing your neck where the last sting landed. It's not just sore, it throbs, pulsing in time with your heartbeat like a tiny drum made of regret. The villagers have returned to their chores, and the hum of the hives is now just part of the natural soundtrack. Birds chirp, leaves rustle, bees unbothered go about their golden errands. But you're questioning every decision that led to this moment, because the bees don't care about your feelings. There's no empathy in the hive, no room for weakness. The bees operate on instinct, ancient and unyielding. If you're calm, they might tolerate you. If you're clumsy or smell off, they sting. End of negotiation. You peer at your hands, red and swollen in spots. The gloves are damp with honey and your own sweat. You can feel your pulse in your thumbs. You smell like firewood and despair. And still, There are more hives to go. The next skep looms ahead, deceptively serene. You approach with that same dreadful hope. Maybe this one will be gentle. Maybe these bees didn't get the memo about your lip. You crouch down and listen. The hum is softer, more rhythmic. You waft your smoke and lift the lid slowly. The bees shift but don't scatter. You can breathe again. This one's different. The comb is newer, paler, with honey that's almost clear, wildflower light and thin as syrup. You scoop some gently into a pot, trying not to drip it everywhere. 1 sting-free minute, then 2. You start to think, maybe I've got this. And then blam! A sting lands squarely on your eyelid. It's instant agony. You stagger backward, nearly knocking over the pot. Tears spring to your eyes, not emotional ones, but the involuntary, why is my face on fire kind. You clamp your hand to your temple and mutter a string of words that would get you excommunicated if anyone could hear them clearly. There's no ice, no cream, no antihistamine. Your only relief is time. You sit down hard on the dirt and wait for the fire to fade. A child skips by, stares at your face, and says, "You look like an apple." Thanks, kid. In truth, facial stings were no joke in medieval times. Severe swelling could obstruct breathing. There were no EpiPens, no adrenaline shots, just poultices made of crushed herbs, cold mud, or in some regions, mashed up eels. You're pretty sure you'd rather take your chances with the bees. The village healer finally arrives, a wizened woman with a cloth bundle and a pouch of herbs. She clucks sympathetically and offers you a compress soaked in vinegar and yarrow tea. It stings, but it helps. You try not to look at your reflection in the pot lid. You know it's bad when even the bees are keeping a respectful distance. Fun tidbit: in certain parts of medieval Europe, getting stung by a bee was considered therapeutic. Some believed bee venom could cure arthritis, boost vitality, or even expel demons. Of course, this belief likely came from observing how inflammation worked, or maybe just from a collective tendency to justify suffering. Historians still argue whether this early version of apitherapy was grounded in any real effect or simply a medieval pain placebo. But some physicians swore by it, applying bees directly to joints or tender spots. Imagine having a medieval doctor lean in, smile, and say, "Oh good, it's swelling. That means it's working." You finally manage to rise, vision slightly blurred on one side, and decide to sit out the next hive. A nearby villager takes over, working with a rhythm that's almost musical. He moves without fear. The bees buzz around him, but they don't strike. You wonder what makes him different. He tells you he's been working with bees since he was a boy. His grandfather was the village apiarist before him. They know you, he says. They know your scent, your way. If you're calm, they're calm. You resist the urge to mention that you were calm, right up until your face exploded. Still, you listen. His movements are slow, respectful. He hums under his breath. Not a song exactly, but a tone. Low, steady. You wonder if the bees can hear it, if they care, if maybe, just maybe, this is less about mastery and more about surrender. You realize something else, too. These bees are tamed. They're not pets or tools. They're collaborators. You don't own them. You negotiate with them. Sometimes you lose. The man finishes his hive and gestures for you to try again, gently, reassuringly. You nod, lips still numb, eyes still twitching, but you stand. Your body aches, your hands tremble, but you return to the scab, because that's what they do here. They get stung, they swell up, they heal, and then they go back to the hive. You're beginning to understand the rhythm of the job, not a profession, but a practice, like prayer, like penance. Even if the bees don't care about your feelings, you're starting to feel like a medieval pincushion. With every sting, your body balloons in a new place. Your hands have puffed up like boiled turnips. Your lip still tingles with betrayal. And your right eye? Let's just say you'd make a convincing medieval cyclops in a village pageant. So when the healer hands you another poultice, this one a mixture of mashed onion, goose grease, and spider webs, you don't argue. You simply press it to your face and try not to cry or gag. She pats your shoulder with a nod of grim encouragement and moves on. You sit there, half mummified in herbal compresses, as the afternoon sun angles westward. Around you, bees continue their sacred work, unbothered by the human melodrama. They're methodical, tireless, and a little bit terrifying. That's when someone suggests invoking Saint Gobnate. Ah, yes, Saint Gubnat, a name you hadn't expected to hear today. Patroness of beekeepers, known for her miraculous ability to summon swarms like an airborne army. According to legend, when raiders threatened her monastery, she lifted her arms and directed a cloud of bees at the intruders, who fled in terror. Some versions say they dropped their weapons and ran. Others say they threw themselves into a bog to escape the stings. Either way, she became a kind of mythic beekeeper general. The villagers believe in her power with quiet, casual certainty. One old man carves her likeness into a bit of driftwood and places it near the hives. Another ties a blue ribbon around the nearest post, her symbolic color. Someone else begins to hum a melody that might be a hymn or might be last year's harvest song. It's hard to tell. The line between superstition and faith is soft here. And itchy, like most of your limbs. Now, for your next surprise. They want you to try the honey. Fresh, raw, and possibly the most medieval thing you've done all day. You break off a piece of comb. It's still warm from the sun, glistening and heavy. You bite in, and it's different. Not like the processed stuff you're used to. It's floral but smoky, sweet but oddly gritty. A little piece of wax crunches between your teeth. You're not sure if it's charming or horrifying. You ask what the grit is. They shrug. Bits, someone says. You decide not to ask further. Honey, in medieval times, wasn't filtered. It often contained pollen, ash from the smoking process, bits of bee wing, and yes, occasionally, a stray larva. It was valued not just for sweetness, but for its supposed medicinal properties. A spoonful for a sore throat, a poultice for a wound, a dollop to mask the flavor of questionable meat. Honey was everything. You're told to suck on a piece of comb and let it melt slowly. It's meant to soothe swelling, calm nerves, and, according to one enthusiastic monk, rebalance your humors. You're not sure what your humors are doing, but they certainly feel out of balance. Here's your quirky fact of the day. In some areas, honey was used in embalming. That's right. Bees' golden gift helped preserve bodies. Alexander the Great's corpse was allegedly transported in a vat of honey to prevent decay. The practice, called mellification, was rare but real. You look down at your sticky fingers and wonder how many body parts you've just touched, historically speaking. At this point, you're developing a deep respect for medieval resilience. These people weren't just tough, they were inventive. Everything had a purpose, especially pain. Historians still debate whether people in the Middle Ages built up a tolerance to bee stings through exposure, or whether they simply accepted the agony as a routine hazard. Some argue that regular beekeepers probably developed some immunity over time. Others believe they just had no better option and gritted their teeth, literally, as you're doing now. You lay back in the grass, watching a few bees dance overhead in slow figure eights. The sting on your eyelid has finally started to recede, thanks to the goose grease spiderweb elixir. Your fingers are still numb, but at least you're not weeping anymore. A boy walks by and offers you a round of bread, drizzled with honey. You take it, chew slowly, and, despite everything, you smile, because in this moment, lying in the grass with bees humming above and sticky crumbs on your chin, you're tasting history. You're feeling the ache of a life that was brutally hard but strangely beautiful. You're wearing the welts and the wisdom. You're surviving. Barely survive. Your fingers are still puffy, your lip looks like it's holding a grudge, and your dignity is hanging by a thread. But you're not done yet. Oh no, because it turns out, beekeeping in the Middle Ages isn't just about collecting honey or dodging stings. It's also about what you do with the wax. Yes, wax. That unassuming byproduct of bee life that just so happens to be the medieval equivalent of gold if you're trying to light anything, bless anything, or bandage anything. You're led into the dim interior of a nearby cottage, ducking under a low timber beam and entering a room that smells of tallow, herbs, and the distinct scent of burning something slightly too organic. Inside, a village woman, broad-shouldered, soot-smudged, and impressively calm, shows you how the combs are gently heated over a clay brazier to extract the wax. The heat is low. The pace is slow. The tools are primitive, mostly pots, stones, and hands that know exactly when to stir and when to wait. As the wax begins to melt, it rises in golden pools that skim the surface of the dark, sludgy honey underneath. You skim it off with a ladle carved from horn and pour it into a shallow wooden mold. You are now a waxworker, and this, unexpectedly, is where you start to fall into a rhythm. You sit by the fire, the bees outside finally giving you a break, and slowly process the spoils of your struggle. The wax cools into soft yellow discs, which the villagers will later shape into candles, salves, and even religious relics. Here's your fun historical tidbit. Beeswax was mandatory for church candles. Tallow, rendered animal fat, smelled awful and smoked like a chimney. Beeswax, on the other hand, burned clean and sweet and was considered more spiritually pure. Monasteries and churches needed massive amounts of it, and guess who provided it? That's right, beekeepers like you. Some churches even had candle quotas. If you didn't produce enough wax for the altar, you risked being spiritually and socially cast out. No pressure. The woman beside you reaches for a hardened wax disc and begins to grate it into a bowl. She adds crushed herbs, comfrey, calendula, and something that smells suspiciously like onion, and stirs it into a thick paste. Then, without ceremony, she gestures for you to remove your glove. You hesitate. She raises an eyebrow. You slowly comply. She smears the warm, fragrant goo over the sting on your wrist and wraps it with a strip of linen. It's surprisingly soothing, and you make a sound somewhere between a sigh and a whimper. Better than eel juice, she says, deadpan. You nod solemnly. Everything is. Now comes the really weird part. She pulls out a tiny wooden box and opens it reverently. Inside, a beeswax wafer, thin as parchment, and embossed with a faint cross. She places it in your hand and says, "Eat." You blink. Apparently, in some villages, beeswax was molded into holy wafers, meant to protect against illness. They were flavored with mint or anise and eaten during feast days or times of plague. Whether they worked is debatable. Historians still argue whether these wafers were meant as literal medicine or symbolic protection. Either way, you chew slowly. It tastes like candle and hope. Later, you help pour fresh wax into iron molds shaped like saints. These will be blessed and sold to pilgrims who believe the candles can cure ailments, keep ships safe, or help with childbirth. One mold is in the shape of a leg, another a foot. For rheumatism, the woman explains. Try not to imagine lighting a leg-shaped candle at someone's bedside. But that's how medieval people saw the world, infused with meaning, layered with symbolism. Wax wasn't just wax. It was medicine, magic, and money. A good beekeeper could provide all three. Step outside, your arm wrapped, your soul slightly waxier than before. The sun is lower now, casting amber light across the meadow. The bees are quieter, sated or tired, maybe both. You feel the same way. But before you can sneak away to collapse in a hayloft, someone calls your name. Another villager. Another skep. Apparently there's one more hive to handle before supper. You sigh. Flex your bandaged hand and grab your smoke bundle. Because in this job, there's always one more hive. You thought you were done. You were so sure, but no. Just as your body begins to recalibrate, sting by sting, welt by welt, you're summoned to the village square by a breathless boy waving his arms and shouting something about bee law. You blink at him. Be what? 10 minutes later, you're standing before the village reeve, still sticky from waxwork and with your face partially wrapped in medicinal linen, facing something that sounds made up. A trial about bees. Apparently, one of your hives has been accused of trespassing. Yes, that's right. A neighboring villager claims your bees flew into his garden, pollinated his herbs, and, scandal of scandals, stung his goat. Said goat, now grumpy and suspicious, refuses to leave the barn and bleats at any buzzing noise. The man gestures wildly, holding out a broken hive fragment as evidence. They swarmed on my land, he cries, and I want restitution. You stare at him, then down at your swollen fingers. You're unsure if this is a prank or an elaborate medieval hazing ritual. But no, everyone's serious. This is bee court. Fun fact, medieval bee laws were absolutely real. Bees, considered valuable livestock, had rights and responsibilities. If your swarm moved on to another's property, you had a limited time to retrieve them, or you lost ownership. There were rules about compensation for stolen hives, stings, and even borrowed bees that were trained to visit certain flowers. Some records even note bizarre bee trials, where entire hives were symbolically summoned before the local court. There are stories of bees being punished for attacking clergy or disturbing religious ceremonies. Historians still argue whether these were legal theatrics or sincerely symbolic events intended to maintain communal order. Back in the square, the reeve, a man with too many keys and not enough eyebrows, asks if you trained your bees to sting the goat. You blink slowly. Did you? He repeats, clearly not joking. You try to explain that bees aren't pets. They don't sit. They don't fetch. They don't take orders. They're anarchists with wings and personal vendettas. But this isn't translating well. So you're told to summon the bees. I'm sorry? What? Summon them. To court. You look around, expecting someone to laugh. No one does. Another villager steps forward, an elderly woman with a thin braid and a basket of wild garlic. She closes her eyes and begins to hum. It's slow, melodic, oddly soothing. And then a few bees actually arrive. Not many, just 3 or 4, but they hover gently in the air around her. She whispers to them, someone murmurs, always has. Whether by scent, tone, or total coincidence, the bees seem to respond to her presence. She turns to the reeve and calmly states, these are not the same bees. These belong to the forest hive. The garden bees are darker. These are golden. Everyone nods. You decide not to challenge it. Verdict? You're off the hook. The reeve gives you a sideways look. Next time, watch your swarm. He slaps the goat on the rump. The goat sneezes. Justice, apparently, has been served. As the crowd disperses, you sit on the edge of a stone well, mind spinning. Be politics, be law, bewitching neighbors. You had no idea this job required legal counsel, spiritual guidance, and a working knowledge of entomological forensics. And yet, it makes sense. In a world where bees are precious and unpredictable, communities had to build structures to manage them. You're not just a beekeeper. You're a diplomat, a steward, a plaintiff apparently. As the sun begins to dip behind the trees, you're handed a flagon of warm ale and a chunk of dark bread spread with, what else? Honey. A sort of consolation prize for surviving court. You raise your mug and take a deep gulp. The woman who summoned the bees sits beside you. She smells like lavender and smoke. They remember you, you know, she says. Bees? She nods. They don't forget kindness or cruelty. You chew your bread slowly, watching the last bees of the day drift back to the hives. You wonder if they remember your clumsy hands, your panic, your apologies whispered through smoke. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but you'll treat them like they do, just in case. Because in this world, bees are more than insects. They're neighbors, they're workers, they're tiny buzzing forces of justice. And you? You're just trying not to get stung again. You wake up the next morning with your head against a sack of barley, mouth dry and limbs stiff from yesterday's bee courtroom debacle. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster yells at nothing. You shift, wincing at the chorus of aches blooming across your joints. Your face still feels uneven. Your hands still throb. But the bees? They're already at work. No one said this would be a one-day ordeal. In fact, judging by the glint in the beekeeper's eyes when he handed you a fresh linen wrap and said, "We start again," this might be your life now. Today's task is transporting honey and wax to the market town 2 miles down the road. You think, finally, a break from the hives. But nothing is ever that simple. You're handed a wooden yoke across your shoulders, with 2 sloshing clay pots hanging from either end. The pots are lined with pitch and wrapped in damp cloth to keep the honey cool. You also carry a pouch of wax discs, tied up like precious coins, which in some ways they are. Because in medieval society, honey was currency. Not officially, of course. Coins were still king, but bartering honey could get you cheese, fabric, ale, or even small repairs. And wax? That could earn you serious favor, especially from monasteries or nobles who needed pure candles for their chapels and shrines. As you trudge along the dirt path, feet slipping on damp leaves, you realize just how heavy success smells. Sweet, sticky, and backbreaking. The path winds through fields, past hedgerows buzzing with bees going about their own business. Every now and then a lone bee flits too close and you flinch out of habit. Trauma runs deep. A local boy joins you part way, pushing a cart of root vegetables. He points to the pots and asks, "Is it true you talk to them, the bees?" He nods. You shrug. I mostly scream and hope they don't notice me. He seems disappointed. You pass a small shrine, stone, weather-worn, nestled beneath an oak. Someone's left a beeswax candle there, still half melted, a small offering, maybe for Saint Ambrose, or Gobnate, or maybe just the bees themselves, whispering thanks or apology, you're not sure which. Here's your historical tidbit. In some parts of Europe, bees were believed to bring messages to the dead. It was tradition to inform the hives when their keeper died, called telling the bees. If you didn't, they might stop producing, leave the hive, or even die themselves. People would approach each skep and whisper the news, sometimes even dressing the hives in black cloth. There was more than superstition. It was respect. And that gives you pause. These people, with all their mud and myths, treated bees like citizens. Tiny winged citizens with rights, temperaments and social rituals. The market town finally appears over a hill. Stone buildings, carts creaking, animals braying. You adjust your load, stretching your sore shoulders, and march down into the noise. Immediately, you're assaulted by smells. Fresh bread, manure, roasted onions, sweat. You find the merchant assigned to the village, an older man with no teeth and too many layers, and begin your barter. He dips a finger into the honey, tastes it, and grunts approvingly. "Wildflower?" he asks. You nod. He squints at the wax discs, then weighs them on a crooked scale. In exchange, you receive a round of cheese, a bolt of rough linen, and a flask of medicinal tincture that smells like vinegar and regret. A fair trade. Just as you're preparing to head back, someone shouts, "Bee thief!" You turn in time to see a scuffle break out at the edge of the square. A wiry man in a patched tunic sprints past, clutching what looks like a small hive box. 2 others give chase, one waving a stick, the other shouting curses involving honey and someone's mother. Welcome to the darker side of the bee business. Bee theft. was a genuine problem in the Middle Ages. Hives were portable, and a skilled thief could move them at night without alarming the bees. Some even claimed to whisper to bees, luring them into following. Others used smoke or bribed corrupt stewards to let them in. The punishments were severe. A stolen hive meant stolen income, food, candles, and medicine. It was a livelihood in a basket. You edge away from the chaos, clutching your pouch of wax a little tighter. Historians still argue whether bee theft rings were widespread or rare crimes amplified by paranoia, but records exist, fines, lashings, and even exile for repeated offenses. Back at the village, the return journey feels longer. Your boots are heavier, your shoulders burn, but you've made it. You've walked the path of the medieval apiarist through thorns, barter, and near beak nappings. And now the sun sinks low again. Bees hum near the hedges. A girl waves at you from the well. You wave back, a little sticky, a lot sore, and feeling somehow a little more connected to the swarm. Because in this life, honey flows in more ways than one, and every drop costs a sting. You'd think, after hauling honey through 2 miles of goat dung-studded roadways and barely surviving bee court, you'd be granted a restful evening. A fire, maybe. Some bread and cheese. A place to lie down without insects nesting in your trousers. But no. Instead, you're summoned to the village church, where the priest and 2 monks are arguing loudly about a king. Not a royal king, a bee king. You blink. Don't you mean queen? They stare at you like you just insulted the Pope's socks. No, one of the monks says with full confidence.
All noble hives are ruled by a king bee, stronger, braver, closest to God.
You raise an eyebrow, despite the swelling. But it's a queen. She lays the eggs. The priest waves a scroll at you. Scripture does not mention such feminine nonsense. You want to point out that Scripture also doesn't mention beeswax salves for eyelid stings. But you wisely hold your tongue. Here's your historical fact. For centuries, Europeans believed the colony was ruled by a king bee. A misconception rooted more in ideology than observation. The idea of a powerful female leader simply didn't fit with medieval views of gender and hierarchy. Even Aristotle described the hive's ruler as a male. It wasn't until the 1600s, with advances in microscopy, that scientists definitively observed the queen laying eggs and called it what it was, a her, not a him. But in your current timeline, that revelation is still centuries away. So tonight, you get to listen to grown men in robes argue about bee royalty with red faces and flailing arms. You sneak glances at the altar, where beeswax candles flicker, symbols of divine purity, their golden light somehow amplifying the absurdity of the debate. Eventually, the priest declares a compromise. Perhaps it is a spiritual king, born of a queen's body. Everyone nods. Crisis averted. Later, you help the monks prepare more candles. This time, they're for a royal offering. A local noblewoman is rumored to be visiting, and the village wants to present her with the purest wax and freshest honey. You're chosen, perhaps because of your swollen face or because you haven't actively spilled anything in the last 24 hours. The wax is melted again, filtered and strained until it shines like solid sunlight. You pour it into special molds, carved with the family crest of the noble house, a pair of intertwined lions, and set them to cool overnight. The honey is sealed into small, dark ceramic jars, each one stamped with a cross. But your real job isn't crafting the gift. It's carrying it at sunrise to the noble estate, through the woods, alone. The villagers act like it's an honor. You suspect it's more like an unwanted lottery win. Still, you're given clean robes, a bit less itchy, a polished walking stick, and a bag of dried apples for the journey. The bees are quiet in the early dawn, and as you step into the trees, everything feels still, peaceful, almost enchanted. You walk for a mile or so, trying not to overthink the way the trees lean just a little too close, or how every bird seems to go silent just as you pass. Your hands are wrapped around the wax bundle like it's a sacred relic, which technically it is. You pass a mossy stone marker, etched with runes and a vaguely insect-shaped carving. A small offering sits at its base, a piece of honeycomb and a wildflower. You don't ask questions. You just nod respectfully and keep walking. Because here's your quirky tidbit. In certain folk traditions, bees weren't just livestock. They were guardians. People believed they had a connection to the spiritual world, that they could sense danger or deliver messages across dimensions. Some legends claim bees could carry prayers to heaven or ferry souls to the afterlife. A hive that thrived was a sign of divine favor. A hive that failed, a warning. You reach the manor house just as the mist begins to lift. It's a modest estate. Stone walls, ivy-covered chimneys, a bored-looking dog. But to you, after the village, it might as well be a palace. Steward greets you with a grunt, takes the bundle, inspects the wax like it might explode, and disappears into the manor without another word. You stand there awkwardly for a moment, wondering if you're supposed to bow or curtsy or just leave. Then a maid appears and presses a warm bread roll into your hand. For the walk back, she says. You nod, mutter something about your honor, and turn to go. As you walk home through the dappled morning light, bees begin to stir again in the hedgerows, and the hum returns. But now it doesn't sound threatening.
It sounds familiar.
Rhythmic.
Like breathing.
Like belonging. And even though the monks still think the queen is a king, and the villagers think you whisper to bees, and your face is still puffy enough to scare livestock, you carry yourself a little straighter. You brought the wax. You survived the swarm. And you're starting to feel something suspiciously like pride. You return to the village, to a quiet chorus of nods and approving hums. No trumpets, no garlands, just a few knowing glances and a fresh smear of herbal paste on your forearm. In this world, that counts as a hero's welcome. Before you can even chew your celebratory bread roll, you're handed a long-handled rake and pointed toward the field. Apparently, the hay needs cutting, and, you guessed it, the hives border the edge of it. Because why not put your already traumatized body in swinging distance of more bees? This is how you learn that being a beekeeper in the Middle Ages wasn't a full-time job. It was an additional job stacked on top of whatever else needed doing. Field work, kitchen prep, fence mending, goat wrangling. Everyone did everything, and if you were good with bees, that just meant you had one more thing to survive. Trudge out to the edge of the field, where the grass grows in uneven waves, and the occasional purple thistle sticks up like it knows it's special. The hives hum a few yards away, nestled in the tall weeds. Your arms are sore, your fingers are bandaged. But you begin the work. The grass whispers as you rake. Bees drift lazily between the blossoms, barely acknowledging your presence. Maybe they recognize you. Maybe they're just full. Maybe your soul has finally passed some sort of ancient apiarian test. As you work, another villager sidles up beside you an older man with a crooked nose and hands like leather. He doesn't say much, just nods toward the hives and says, "They've been strange lately." You pause. "Strange how?" He shrugs. "Dancing funny." You blink. "I'm sorry. Dancing." He gestures with one rough finger, drawing a strange figure-8 shape in the air. "They do it when they find something, a good flower, or water. Sometimes it means trouble." Ah, yes, the bee dance, the waggle dance, as modern science would call it, a form of communication in which bees convey the direction and distance of nectar sources through body movement. But in the Middle Ages, people didn't have microscopes or high-speed cameras. They just saw the bees dancing. And so naturally they assumed it was a kind of omen. Historians still argue whether medieval beekeepers interpreted these dances as signs of danger, bounty, or divine messages. Some records even mention bees' warning of storms or illness. You glance toward the sky. It's clear now, but a shiver creeps down your spine. Later that afternoon, you're called to the herbalist's hut, where beeswax is being used for yet another strange but very real purpose: sealing letters. Yes, honey may have been sweet, but wax was powerful. It held things together, preserved food, closed wounds, sealed secrets. You watch as a young monk drips hot wax onto a folded parchment and presses a carved stamp into it. The scent is sharp and comforting all at once. He lifts the seal and smiles. "Message for the abbess," he says. Apparently, the bee's work doesn't stop at candles and combs. And here's your fringe fact for the day. Some medieval people believed that wax carried memory, that anything sealed in wax retained not just the scent or shape, but the spirit of what it touched. There were whispers of beeswax amulets used to preserve vows or lock away curses. Nothing you'd find in official doctrine, of course, but whispered behind barns and baked into small charms all the same. You're handed a small disc of wax, inscribed with a spiral pattern. "For protection," someone says, pushing it into your palm. "Keep it near your chest." You nod. You've stopped questioning things by now. As the sun slants lower, painting everything in gold, the hives seem to glow. The bees continue their endless ballet, buzzing, dancing, darting from bloom to bloom. You sit beneath an ash tree and breathe, finally, without pain. Your hands rest in your lap. Your shoulders relax. A bee lands on your knee, rests there for a moment, then lifts off without incident. You smile. Because now, you're part of the rhythm. The endless give and take, the sting and the sweetness. You've danced the dance, even if it looked more like flailing. And you've come out the other side. Sticky, swollen, and smelling faintly of onions, but wiser, calmer. You may not be a monk or a whisperer or a saint with a bee army, but you've made it halfway through a day in the life of a medieval beekeeper. And somehow, you're still standing. By now, your movements are slower, not from laziness, but from a kind of learned reverence. You've stopped swatting at every buzz near your ear. You no longer jump at the sight of a yellow blur. Instead, you tilt your head slightly, listening for tone, for rhythm, for the difference between a curious hum and a warning growl. Today's job? Guard duty. But not for the hives. For the honey. You're posted near the granary, where the harvested jars sit neatly lined up on wooden planks sealed with wax and marked with small, scratchy symbols indicating their origin: meadow hive, orchard hive, river hive. It's like a library of liquid gold. You ask why anyone would need to guard honey. The answer comes with a knowing glance and a single whispered word. Thieves. Welcome to the shadowy world of medieval honey fraud. Apparently, some unscrupulous villagers and traveling merchants dilute real honey with tree sap, boiled sugar beets, or even ground chickpeas. It's hard to detect unless you know the signs, and most buyers don't. You're handed a wooden rod and a rough checklist. Smell the jars, check the lids for wax integrity, tap the sides to hear the consistency. Honey should be thick, not sloshy. Darker jars usually mean forest flowers. Lighter jars come from clover, meadows, or wild thyme. You feel a bit like a wine sommelier with a head injury. Later, an old man arrives at the stall. He says he's from the next village over. He carries a pot of honey and wants to trade it for real wax. You open the pot, smell it, frown. It's wrong. It's thin, sour, smells faintly of boiled roots. He insists it's from his own bees, but your gut and your nose tell you otherwise. You shake your head. He curses you under his breath and stomps off trailing flies. Fraud averted. This is your quirky fact of the day. Honey fraud has been a problem for thousands of years. Ancient Egyptians had laws against it. So did the Romans. In the medieval period, it was punishable by public shaming, fines, or, if the buyer was a noble, even imprisonment. Because honey wasn't just food, it was medicine, it was offering, it was trust in a jar. You never thought you'd get emotionally involved with honey. But here we are. Around midday, a boy runs up to you with wide eyes and a breathless warning. The orchard hive is missing. You blink. Missing as in gone. You drop your stick and run. Sure enough, the skep that once sat nestled between the two pear trees is gone. Not broken, not attacked by animals, just not there. You crouch down, inspecting the flattened grass. No blood, no fur, no chaos, just drag marks. Someone took it. Bee thief, someone mutters behind you. The village goes on alert. That night, you're invited to the bee moot, a gathering of keepers, monks, and a few older villagers who claim to remember the last theft as though it were a war. They meet in the candlelit loft of the miller's barn, sitting in a circle of overturned buckets and crates. The smell of beeswax hangs heavy in the air. An elder speaks. This is not the first time someone's tried to steal the bees, and it won't be the last. But we must remember the bees know. Another nods solemnly. They remember their keeper. This is where the strategy begins. By torchlight, you prepare bundles of herbs, lay out trails of crushed lavender, and mix a concoction of vinegar and honey to bait the hive back, or at least lure the thief into revealing themselves. Some believe the bees will follow the scent. Others claim they will return if they hear the keeper's voice. You whisper to the empty spot where the skep once was. Come home. You're told to keep a candle burning all night in your window, a beacon for the bees should they wander back. And here's where things get downright mystical. One of the monks says that in some traditions, hives were considered semi-sentient, not just clever, aware, that they had allegiances, that they could choose to stay or leave. Historians still debate whether this belief was pure folklore or based on actual observed behavior. After all, Bees do sometimes abandon hives en masse, a phenomenon known as colony collapse. In medieval times, they just called it a sign. A sign of what? No one agrees. By the time the meeting breaks, you're assigned a midnight shift near the orchard. You sit by a lantern, holding a small pot of crushed thyme, your stick across your knee. The stars shimmer above you. The night air is cool. In the silence, the hum of the remaining hives feels louder. You wait, and then you hear it, a faint buzzing, not near, not aggressive, but present. You turn. A single bee lands on your boot, walks in a slow, deliberate circle, then flies off toward the trees. You stand, heart thudding, because in this village, that's not just a bee, that's a clue. You follow the bee, not because it makes sense, not because you're trained in any form of insect reconnaissance, but because, after everything you've been through, it seems like the most logical thing to do. The little creature zips low over the orchard grass, veering between the pear trees, before disappearing into the woods beyond. You hesitate at the tree line. It's dark in there. No lanterns. No moonlight, no comforting hum of familiar hives, just the creak of trees and the rustle of something that might be wind, or might not. Still, you go, because somewhere out there is a stolen hive, and you're not going home without it. You wrap your shawl tighter and step into the dark, guided by instinct, stubbornness, and the faintest glimmer of beeswax-scented determination. You don't walk far before you smell something odd, smoke, but not wood smoke, something earthier, a mixture of damp straw and burnt moss. You pause, crouch, listen, a soft hum, not bees, voices, two of them, low and muttering. You inch forward through the underbrush until you see a faint orange glow. There, half hidden behind a fallen log, someone has lit a small fire beside a makeshift lean-to. And next to it, balanced on a slab of stone like some ridiculous forest altar, is the orchard hive. You stare at it in disbelief. The skep's been pried open, its base jammed with herbs likely to keep the bees calm. A risky move, a disrespectful one. You watch the two figures. One with a soot-smudged face, the other with a knife tucked in his boot, arguing about whether to sell the wax separately or keep it for candles. Neither seems remotely qualified to handle bees, and the hive, it hums like a storm about to break. You feel a deep, irrational sense of anger on behalf of the bees. How dare they? Now you could sneak back and alert the village, or you could improvise. You take out your flask, the one the monk gave you days ago, filled with mead so strong it could strip paint. You soak a corner of your shawl in it, strike your flint, and light it. Thin, acrid smoke begins to curl up from the cloth. The thieves stop talking. You step forward into the firelight, holding your makeshift smudge stick high. One of them leaps up. Who's there? You say nothing. Just wave the smoke and let the bees do the rest. Because, here's your fun historical tidbit, mead, fermented honey wine, wasn't just for drinking. Some apiarists used it to calm bees, lure swarms, or, in certain odd rituals, sprinkle a few drops at the hive entrance to bless the queen. It was believed that bees liked mead, or at least responded to its scent. These bees respond all right. As the smoke wafts toward the open skep, they pour out in a slow-motion cascade. Not angry, not aggressive, just decisive. The thieves panic. One slaps at the air and runs into a bush. The other grabs a sack of wax and trips over his own boot. They bolt, comically, loudly, into the darkness. You stand your ground, smoke rising from your hand like some kind of apocalyptic beekeeper. The bees hover, swirl, then settle. Back into the hive, back home. You let out a breath you didn't realize you'd been holding and step forward to gently examine the skep. It's still intact. The bees are restless but not vengeful. You whisper something to them. Thank you, maybe. Or sorry. You're not sure. The next morning, you return to the village with the hive, wrapped in linen and balanced on a borrowed cart. You met with disbelief, cheers, and one woman who insists on throwing flower petals at your feet. You tell the story simply. The bees came back. No one questions it. Later, at the abbey, the monks prepare a special mead ceremony in your honor. They mix fermented honey with herbs, sage, rose hips, and wild chamomile, and pour it into carved wooden cups. One monk explains that it's for reconnecting with the sacred rhythm of the swarm. You sip. It's sweet and sharp, like everything else in this life. Here's a little-known fringe detail. Mead wasn't just a drink. It was believed to open the heart, inspire visions, and when taken in moderation, grant communion with nature. Some monasteries used it in seasonal rites. A few apiarists even blessed their hives with it during the solstice. That night, by candlelight, you listen to the hum of the hives echoing across the fields. It's not threatening anymore. It's familiar, grounding, like a lullaby sung in a language only your body understands. The noble's candles have arrived safely. The stolen hive is back. The court case has been forgotten. The swelling has gone down mostly. And you? You're no longer just a stand-in. You're part of the system now. The bees didn't just let you survive, they let you belong. You're woken before dawn by the clanging of a cracked church bell and the sharp jolt of someone handing you a jug of water and a crust of bread before you've even sat up. Same day, they mutter. We need the good candles. You blink away sleep and honey dreams and remember today is St. Ambrose's feast, patron saint of bees, beekeepers, and apparently anyone willing to crawl out of bed before the birds. The abbey is already stirring. Monks scurry about in their sandals and wool robes, laying out tablecloths, polishing candlesticks, arranging offerings. You're handed a wax block and a dull knife, and told to shave curls for the altar. You sit cross-legged in the apse, carving soft spirals of beeswax like golden ribbons, watching the first light filter through stained glass. The curls are placed in a ceramic bowl meant to be burned with incense. One monk whispers that the smoke will carry the bees' blessings up to heaven. You nod solemnly, though your brain is still catching up. The entire morning becomes a kind of buzzing blur. There's honey bread baking in the hearth. A choir practices their chant, low and echoing. And then there's you, half drowsy, fully sticky, kneeling to help place beeswax candles along the nave. They are perfect, tall, smooth, and sweet-smelling. Their flames burn brighter and steadier than anything made of tallow. You finally understand why churches required beeswax for their holy rituals. It wasn't just about light, it was about purity. Tallow was animal fat, worldly, smoky, profane. Beeswax came from nature, from mystery, from something the church couldn't quite explain but deeply revered. Here's your historical tidbit. In medieval Europe, only beeswax candles were allowed to burn on church altars. The rules were strict. Anything else was considered spiritually unclean. These candles were used not just for Mass, but for baptisms, funerals, and major feast days, like today. As the service begins, the priest raises a beeswax candle above his head and recites a Latin blessing. Then he walks down the aisle, letting the villagers light their own little candles from the sacred flame. You're handed one. It's warm in your fingers, comforting. You hold it like something precious, which in this time it truly is. The priest begins a sermon that, frankly, drifts in and out of your understanding. Something about order and obedience and the sweetness of communal labor. He references St. Ambrose, recounting how bees once settled on his infant face without stinging, leaving a drop of honey on his lips. A sign, the legend says, that he would become an eloquent speaker. Honey-tongued, you glance at the altar, where a carved wooden bee sits nestled among the lilies. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some medieval farmers believed bees were God's scribes, recording the sins and blessings of their keepers in their hive's behavior. If your bees died suddenly or stopped producing, it might mean you'd been dishonest or selfish or even impure in thought. People would confess to their bees, ask forgiveness, and sometimes even sing to them in apology. You hum a little under your breath, just in case. The service ends with a procession to the edge of the village, where everyone stands in a circle around the hives. The priest sprinkles holy water across the field, and a young girl sings a single high note that lingers on the breeze. A few bees emerge, buzz lazily, circle, return. The crowd disperses slowly, some laughing, others silent. You stay back, crouching beside one of the hives. You feel oddly protective, not just of the honey or the wax, but of them. These strange, tireless, enigmatic creatures who've stung you, healed you, ignored you, and maybe, just maybe, tolerated you. You whisper, "Thanks for not killing me." One lands on your wrist, walks a small circle, flies off. You take that as a good sign. That evening, a monk invites you to the mead cellar tucked below the abbey. It's cool and damp, with shelves lined in dusty bottles sealed in wax. He hands you a goblet and a slice of dense honey cake and raises his glass. To the hive, to the keeper, and to the ones who buzz in mystery. You clink goblets. Sip. It's rich, spiced, warm enough to untie the knots in your shoulders. You close your eyes for a moment, listening. There's no choir, no shouting, just the distant, barely there hum of hives in twilight. Somewhere between the candlelight and the clinking of cups, it dawns on you. You're not visiting this world anymore. You're part of it now. The keeper of the sting, the shepherd of the swarm, the slightly puffy, somewhat sticky, profoundly humbled beekeeper of St. Ambrose's day. And honestly, you've had worse titles. You wake the next day to the sound of bees tapping gently against the window shutters, like tiny messengers reminding you you're late. It's inspection day. Once every few weeks, the village apiarists and monks conduct a full hive review, a ritual as much as a necessity. You're now expected to participate as if your welts and weirdly acquired reputation for bee whispering make you qualified. Someone hands you a notched wooden rod, the medieval equivalent of a clipboard, and a pot of soot for marking hives that need watching. You trudge to the apiary, muscles stiff, mouth still sweet from too much mead. The morning light cuts across the field, illuminating the skeps like golden domes. Bees zip between blossoms, busy with their quiet, elegant lives. You're told to observe, not interfere. Look for signs. Sluggish drones, misshapen comb, too many dead at the entrance. You squat beside a hive and begin to notice things. Things you'd have missed just days ago. A single bee dragging out a lifeless one. A little pile of pollen at the base of the straw. A strange smudge near the rim of the skep. Varroa, one monk mutters, crouching beside you. You frown. What's that? He shrugs. A curse. Some say a rot in the brood. Some say a forest sickness. You look again. The combs inside seem dimpled, darker than usual, the bees sluggish. You dip your finger into the soot and mark the skep with a simple X. It's a quiet way of saying, check back later, something's off. Here's your historical nugget. While medieval beekeepers didn't know about parasites like Varroa destructor, they did recognize signs of hive failure. Their terminology wasn't medical, it was often spiritual or elemental. The hive has turned sour, or the bees have lost their purpose. Some blamed the weather, others blamed witches, still others believed the hive's moral balance had been upset. And so began the rituals. One woman sprinkles ash around her hives. Another recites a poem in Old English while turning a dried thistle in her hand. A monk circles each skep 3 times, swinging a censer of beeswax incense and muttering blessings. A moral, you try not to sneeze. Your quirky tidbit for the day. In parts of medieval Europe, if a hive failed twice in a row, it was considered cursed and had to be burned, buried, or in extreme cases, confessed to. That's right. The keeper would kneel before the skep and speak aloud any sins they'd committed, hoping that the bees might forgive them and return. You mark a second hive, another X. The bees are listless, the combs visibly sagging. You find yourself whispering, sorry, under your breath. Not for the soot, but for whatever might have gone wrong. By midday, your arms are covered in straw scratches, and your legs feel like honey-soaked logs. But you've marked 6 hives, 3 to monitor, 2 to leave alone, 1 to quarantine. You've also gained a few curious looks. They listen to you, one monk says, not quite smiling. I think they're just tired of stinging me, he laughs. Maybe. Or maybe they know you're paying attention. You help him patch a cracked skep, mashing horse dung, clay, and straw into a sort of rustic, bee-friendly cement. It smells like despair, but holds remarkably well. As you work, he tells you about the bee calendar, an unofficial guide followed by keepers to plan their tasks. Most of it follows the church calendar. Easter for swarm preparation, Pentecost for honey gathering, All Saints for wintering the hives. But then there are the superstitions. If a swarm flies on the Sunday, it's cursed. If bees dance near a graveyard, someone's about to die. If a child is born during the hive's first hum of spring, they'll never be stung. You glance at him sideways. You believe all that? He shrugs. I believe in patterns, and the bees keep their own. That night, as you sit by the fire, rubbing your knees with a warmed beeswax and herb balm, you try to recall all the hive patterns you've seen. The fast ones, the gentle ones, the angry ones that seem to know exactly where your eyelid was. You realize something. The hives all hum at slightly different pitches. Some sharp, some low, some with a kind of tremble in their rhythm. It's not a random drone. It's a language, a chorus. You listen. And for the first time, you understand why some medieval monks called it the hymn of the hives. Because this buzzing, flickering, swelling symphony of life, it's sacred, even if it also give you hives. Literally. The air smells like smoke, clover, and something faintly ominous. You know that smell? That electric, tingly sense in your nostrils. The villagers know it too. One glances up at the sky and mutters, "Storm's coming." You'd hoped today would be quiet, patch a skep, maybe sneak a honey roll. But the bees have other plans. Their hum is restless, too loud, too fast. One by one they begin to pour from the hives, spiraling in chaotic rising clouds. It's not just a buzz. It's a swarm. Panic sets in. You stand, wiping your hands on your tunic. Where are they going? An older beekeeper shouts, "To find a new home. We have to follow." Just like that, you're running. Again. Swarming is natural. When a hive gets too crowded, the queen takes a portion of the colony and leaves, seeking a new space to build. But in the Middle Ages, swarming wasn't seen as routine. It was drama. It was a crisis. A fleeing hive meant lost honey, lost wax, and, if you were superstitious, a bad omen for the season. You chase the mass of bees through the orchard, ducking under low branches, heart pounding. The sky darkens. Thunder rumbles in the distance. The swarm moves like a living cloud, undulating, pulsing, as if guided by invisible threads. Then suddenly, they stop. The entire swarm gathers around a crooked apple tree, forming a dense, buzzing clump the size of a watermelon, hanging from a low branch like an ominous fruit. You freeze. So does everyone else. This is your historical fact. Medieval apiarists collected swarms by hand. That's right. Bare hands, no gloves, no suits, just courage, timing, and a prayer to St. Ambrose. The method was to shake the branch gently so the swarm drops into a basket or sack placed underneath. If the queen falls in, the rest follow. Easy in theory, terrifying in practice. You're the only one they haven't stung to death, someone says, shoving a basket into your hands. Great. You step forward, slowly, each crunch of grass like a church bell in your ears. The bees are thick, layered, twitching with tension. One false move, and it's welts for weeks. You whisper. Not a word, really. More like a sound. Something between breath and chant. A hum. You don't know why. It just feels right. You position the basket under the branch. You brace, and then you shake. The clump drops in one slow motion fall. Some bounce out, most don't. The swarm begins to settle, crawling in on themselves, adjusting, shifting. You hold your breath. Then, like a collective sigh, they stay. You did it! A roar of relief rises from the villagers. You've caught the swarm. But you're not done. Not yet. The bees need a new home. One skep is hastily patched and placed near the field's edge, filled with old wax to lure them in. You tip the swarm gently into it, like pouring soup made of wings and fury. They crawl inside. You step back dizzy with adrenaline and awe. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some places, people sang to swarms. They believed a swarm would land peacefully if greeted with the right melody. Some banged pots or rang bells, trying to confuse or guide the bees. Others swore by reciting specific psalms or poems. One 13th century rhyme goes, "Swarm, swarm, settle down, in a bush or on the ground. Saint Mary send thee to me, the May come to thee." You hum your own version under your breath just to be safe. Later, as rain finally begins to fall in soft, fat drops, you stand by the new hive watching the bees crawl in and out. The thunder rolls gently overhead. The storm came, but the bees stayed, and that means something. The monk from the abbey joins you, umbrella in hand, offering a cup of herbal tea. "You know," he says, "some say a swarm in May is worth a load of hay." And in August, he smirks, "Worth your weight in honey." You sip the tea. It tastes like lemon balm and survival. And here's a scholarly debate for your inner library. Do bees swarm based solely on colony size and environmental factors? Or is there something more intuitive going on? Some historians believe medieval beekeepers may have observed subtle hive behaviors long before we had the language to explain them. Pacing of the guards, changes in the buzz tone, a queen's restlessness. Others argue it was all superstition and luck. The line, as always, is blurry. But today you trusted your gut, and the bees trusted you back. You walk home through the drizzle, shoes squelching, hair soaked, arms limp from hauling hives. A bee rides along on your shoulder like a tiny, sticky badge of honor. When you arrive at your hut, someone's left a bundle of dried lavender and a round of honey cheese on your doorstep. You smile, because here, catching a swarm isn't just a chore. It's a rite of passage. The next morning dawns soft and golden, the storm long gone, the air rinsed clean. A perfect day to rest, you think, until someone knocks on your door with a look that says, "Absolutely not." "You're needed at the abbey," they say, "for the relic." You blink. The what? They hand you a small wooden chest, no bigger than a loaf of bread. It's sealed with beeswax and bound in leather straps, and it buzzes slightly when you touch it. You are now the reluctant guardian of a bee-wrapped relic. Here's what you're told. The abbey is expecting a group of pilgrims, nobles, and clergy here to view one of the church's sacred miracles. The relic inside the chest is said to be a small vial of sanctified honey, believed to have been collected by Saint Gobnate herself. It's been sealed with beeswax for over a century and can only be opened during specific celestial alignments, which conveniently include today. You try to ask questions like, "Why is it buzzing?" and "What exactly happens if we open it wrong?" But no one seems concerned. Your only instructions? Bring it to the chapel. Handle with reverence. Do not break the wax seal. You tuck the box beneath your cloak and set off, accompanied by 2 monks with solemn faces and a donkey that smells like wet moss. It feels like you're delivering a royal heir or a dormant volcano. Along the way, one monk leans in and says, "There's a rumor that the honey inside never spoils, that it glows, that it smells like Eden." You try to look unimpressed, but your palms are sweaty. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Honey doesn't spoil. Archaeologists have found 3,000-year-old pots of honey in Egyptian tombs that are still edible. Honey's low water content and acidic pH make it naturally resistant to bacteria. In the Middle Ages, this quality gave it a kind of divine aura, an incorruptible substance like saints' bones or holy water. You arrive at the chapel. It's small, candlelit. The air, thick with incense and breathless anticipation. The pilgrims kneel. The monks chant. The priest gestures for you to approach the altar. You place the box down. They begin the ritual. First, the beeswax seal is anointed with oil, lavender, and frankincense. Then a slow flame is passed underneath to soften it. The wax doesn't melt, it shimmers. A faint scent escapes, honey and thyme and something ancient. The priest carefully lifts the lid. Inside, nestled in straw, is a tiny glass vial wrapped in silk. The honey within it catches the light like amber. A few tiny bubbles shimmer as if the contents are still warm, still alive. The crowd murmurs. Someone starts crying. You feel something between awe and mild nausea. And here's your fringe tidbit. In some parts of medieval Ireland, it was believed that relics infused with beeswax and honey carried not just healing powers, but memory, that the bees recorded the essence of the saint, the moment, the blessing, and sealed it into the honey. Some pilgrims would touch the vial, then press their fingers to their lips. Others whispered their secrets to it. The priest dips a silver pin into the honey, lifts it, and lets a single drop fall onto a clean cloth. Then the box is closed, resealed with fresh wax, and placed back into storage for another generation. The entire ritual takes less than 20 minutes. And yet you feel different walking out, like you've seen something you weren't supposed to, like you've touched a sliver of time older than you know how to carry. That evening, the villagers light candles in the field and set out bowls of water and honey at the base of each hive, a gift for the bees. Not just gratitude, but recognition. You sit in the grass, watching the flickering lights and the lazy twirls of curious drones investigating the offerings. You think about that sealed vial, about how something so small, so sticky, could carry faith across centuries. A little girl toddles over and plops into your lap. She holds out a wax figurine, a crude bee, lopsided but charming. For you, she says. You hold it gently. It's warm from her hands. The monk beside you says, the relic isn't just in the honey, it's in the keeping. You nod, because now you understand. Being a medieval beekeeper isn't about harvesting. It's not about wax or trade or even survival. It's about custody of life, of light, of the rhythm between sting and sweetness. And for one dizzy, candlelit moment, you feel like you're a part of something enormous, ancient, and quietly buzzing. By now, the villagers have stopped calling you the new one. They just call you the keeper, which would feel like a compliment if your joints didn't ache and your eyebrows weren't permanently singed from smoke. Today, though, your role is more ceremonial. You've been invited, commanded, really, to take part in the annual bee telling. You're told very little in advance, just that it involves dressing up, not offending anyone, and keeping your voice steady. You arrive at the orchard to find the villagers already gathered, standing solemnly in a wide circle around the hives. Some wear garlands of herbs. Others carry tiny bells or sprigs of rosemary. A child plays a shrill note on a bone flute, and there at the center is the village elder, a woman with a cloak made of stitched linen scraps and a crown of dried honeycomb. She holds a staff topped with a carved bee. You try not to laugh. You fail. She notices. She does not laugh back. This is the telling of the bees, an ancient ritual rooted in the belief that bees are more than just insects. They are family, and like any proper kin, they must be kept informed. You're handed a woven ribbon and told to wrap it around your waist. This signifies you're the messenger, the teller, and today you'll be whispering not just to the bees, but on behalf of the dead. Because here's your historical fact. In many parts of medieval Europe, it was customary to inform bees when a family member died. People believed that if the bees were not told of their keeper's passing, they would abandon the hive, stop producing, or even die. Sometimes the hives were draped in black cloth. Sometimes food from the funeral was left nearby. Always, someone would kneel beside the hive and gently speak the news. You walk slowly between the skeps, head bowed. A monk rings a small bell behind you. Another swings a censer of beeswax incense. You stop before the first hive and whisper, "Your keeper, Tom, has passed. He gave you water when the summer cracked the ground. He spoke kindly to you when the wind howled. He's gone now. You are not forgotten." Move to the next. Your sister hive is no more. Fire took her in the night. Her keepers mourn. Her bees flew home to the wild. But you are safe. And the next. The child who fed you clover each morning now sleeps in the earth. Her name was Ellen. Her laugh was bright. She loved your hum. By the fourth hive, your voice is tight. Because this isn't just ritual. It's memory. It's mourning. It's how this village carries its stories, not just in parchment or song, but in bees. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some keepers believed bees could carry messages to the afterlife. Whisper your grief into the hive, and the bees would hum it skyward. Some monks wrote letters to the dead and tucked them beneath the skep. Others composed little rhymes for the bees to sing as they flew. You begin to understand why so many apiarists grew quiet with age. At the final hive, the elder hands you a small slip of parchment. This one, she says, is personal. You unfold it. It reads, "To the keeper who came unwillingly, who stayed with stung hands and swollen eyes, who learned our rhythm and never left the comb. Thank you." You look up, startled. The villagers are watching, not smiling, not clapping, just witnessing. You crouch beside the hive and whisper the message aloud. The bees, as usual, do not respond, but one crawls onto your finger. Pauses, then flies off into the late afternoon sun. Later that night, as the candles burn low and the fields fall quiet, the elder passes you a small pot of honey, marked with a wax seal in the shape of a heart. "For the telling," she says. You dip your finger in. Taste it. Floral, deep, almost musky. It tastes old. From the orchard hive, you ask? She nods. From Tom's skep, the last harvest. You close the pot carefully, pressing the seal tight. Not for trade, not for show. Keeping. Because that's what you do now. You wake to a peculiar smell. Smoke, vinegar, and something sharp that makes your eyes water. It's not the usual comforting scent of herbs and hay. No, this is distinctly medicinal. You swing your legs off the straw-stuffed mattress and open the shutters to a scene of controlled panic. The abbey courtyard is crawling with monks. Buckets sloshing, bundles of herbs smoldering in metal bowls. People are scrubbing stones, hanging linens, and dragging benches into the sun. A woman paces with a chicken tucked under her arm and a look of total dread. Then you hear it. The bell tolls 3 times in slow succession. The plague has reached the next village. No one says it outright, but everyone knows. You're summoned once again to the hives. Because when people fear people, they turn to bees. You walk past hastily chalked crosses on doorposts, bundles of garlic strung over thresholds, and children sent to sleep in barns just in case. But the hives remain untouched. They are still humming, still working. Still sacred. Here's your historical fact. During times of plague, bees were often seen as symbols of purity and protection. Their hives, away from human contact and untouched by rot, were considered refuges of health. Some even believed the scent of honey and wax could ward off illness. Beekeepers were among the few who still ventured out daily, wrapped in layers armed with smoke, doing what had to be done. The monks ask you to help prepare protective bundles for the hives: rosemary, juniper, mint, and oddly, rue, the herb of grace. These are tied in knots and hung from poles around the apiary like floral sentinels. A young novice hands you a beeswax candle shaped like a small human figure. To keep the keeper, he says softly. You light it without hesitation. Then comes the odd part. The herbalist calls for a handful of bees. You want live bees? You ask, slowly backing up. She nods. Just a few, for the salve. You blink. I thought the bees made the medicine. They are the medicine. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some medieval healers believed bee stings could purge illness, especially the bad humors. Bee venom was used in what we now call apitherapy. The logic? Pain meant movement, and movement meant healing. A sting to the temple for headaches, a sting to the belly for digestive woes, a sting to the, well, some spots are better left unstung. Scholars still argue whether these practices had any real physiological effect, or were just pain distraction tactics wrapped in wishful thinking. But records show that bees were quite literally pressed into service. You gently coax a few sleepy bees into a jar with a slotted lid and pass them off to the herbalist. She bows her head in thanks like you've delivered sacred incense. The hives, meanwhile, seem oblivious to the human drama unfolding around them. No fear, no frenzy, just order, purpose, cleanliness. And here's the strange thing you start to notice. No one sick is near the hives. Not a single coughing villager. Not a single feverish child. It could be coincidence, or distance, or air currents. Or it could be something no one understands. People begin to whisper that the bees are clean, that their wax repels the sickness, that their hum is a blessing, a kind of airborne benediction. One woman, pale and shivering, crawls to the edge of the apiary and just sits, She doesn't touch anything. She doesn't speak. She just listens to the buzzing. Later, someone finds her asleep, breathing steadily, color returning to her face. Is it real? Is it luck? Is it belief? The historian in you itches to explain, but the keeper in you just watches. That evening, a monk asks you to help seal a sick room. You melt a small disc of beeswax, pour it carefully along the edges of the doorframe, and press rosemary sprigs into it. It's not a lock. It's a prayer, the monk says. If the bees knew how to survive a winter, maybe they know how to survive this. And that, more than anything, becomes the village's hope. Not a cure, not a miracle, but a model. Because bees endure. They adapt. They clean. They sacrifice. They never stop. And you, swollen-fingered and sleep-deprived, find yourself doing the same. At dawn, you check the hives again. No one asks you to. No one follows. You do it because it feels necessary. You place your hand gently against the warm straw. Hum. Steady, alive. You whisper. Stay with us. And for once, you think you hear them answer. It begins with a knock, not the frantic kind that accompanies plague warnings or bee theft. No, this one is slow, purposeful, almost delicate. You open your door to find a finely dressed servant, holding a sealed scroll and a look that says, "Don't make me explain twice." The noble woman is requesting your presence. No, not requesting, summoning. Apparently the honey and wax you helped deliver weeks ago have become quite the sensation. The noble woman now demands another offering. This time, however, she wants more than candles. She wants bee venom for her face. You choke slightly. You mean to sting her? The servant nods. To keep her youthful. It's all the fashion. And so, with a bag of bees and a sense of disbelief, you return to the manor. You know them. Here is your historical fact. Medieval and early Renaissance elites dabbled in all sorts of bizarre beauty rituals. Leeches for complexion, crushed pearls for whitening, snail slime for healing. Bee venom was rumored to tighten skin, reduce wrinkles, and stimulate vitality. No science supported this, of course. But when has that ever stopped the upper class? The noble woman's chambers are lush and dim. Curtains like tapestries, a fire smolders despite the heat outside. She reclines on a velvet couch, veil drawn back to reveal a face already glistening with some sort of perfumed oil. "Ah," she says, lifting one pale hand, "the apiarist." You consider correcting her to beekeeper, but choose life instead. She gestures to a stool. "Proceed." You're handed a tiny lacquered cage containing a single docile bee, cooled to lethargy from its time in the herbalist's apothecary. You're to press it gently to her cheek, just enough to sting, not enough to swell. No pressure. You lift the bee. You hesitate. "Now," she commands. You press. Sting. She exhales sharply, not in pain, but satisfaction. Again. After the third sting, she waves you off with a dismissive flick and returns to her wine, already admiring herself in a polished metal mirror. You retrieve the bees, some still alive, some not, and retreat as gracefully as a smoke-scented, welty beekeeper can manage. On the way out, you pass the steward, who hands you a heavy pouch of silver and a folded note. It reads, "Link, your bees are divine. I shall need more. You mutter something unprintable in medieval Latin and head home, but this experience sticks with you. Not just the absurdity, but the fact that bees, these wild, humming miracles of nature, have now become fashionable accessories. You return to the village a little heavier, not just from the coin, but from what it represents. You pass the hives, still buzzing, still working, oblivious to their high society admirers. They don't care if their venom makes skin glow or their wax burns clean. They care about rhythm, duty, nectar, and maybe you should too. That evening, as a swarm hums quietly against the sky and the villagers light their nightly candles, you sit beside the orchard hive and begin to write. Yes, write, because here's your final quirky tidbit. Some medieval beekeepers kept journals, not formal treatises, but little notebooks of weather, bloom patterns, hive temperament, and yes, even dreams. Scholars still debate how much of this was record keeping and how much was superstition, but the line, once again, is beautifully blurred. You dip your quill into ink made from crushed berries and begin. The orchard hive swarmed today at noon. The noblewoman has discovered their sting. The bees said nothing of it. You write until the light fades. Then you close the book, place it under your head, and lie back in the grass. You're no longer scared of the buzz. You miss it when it's not there. You drift to sleep with your hands sticky, your back sore, and your ears ringing with the quiet rhythm of wings. You would not have survived your first day in a medieval beekeeper suit, but somehow, improbably, you made it through many. So now, as the last candle flickers and the bees settle into sleep, take a long, slow breath. Feel the pulse of the hive fading into stillness. Your fingers still tingle from remembered stings. Your feet ache from miles walked through damp meadows and smoky cloisters. But you've made it through superstition and swarm, through trial and tribunal, through sticky fingers and sacred rituals. You began as an outsider, just another soul thrust into the scratchy robe and stiff boots of a forgotten trade. But over time, the bees taught you how to move with care, how to listen without needing words, how to survive the sting and still return to the comb. You now understand what it means to tend something delicate, even dangerous, because you believe it holds meaning, purpose, pattern, and maybe, in some small way, truth. So as your breath slows and your thoughts grow softer, imagine it now, a quiet field, a row of humble skeps, golden light spilling across the grass, and within each hive, a low, steady hum, not of danger, but of continuity, of lives lived and lost, kept and told. Somewhere in that humming rhythm, you, a little bruised, a little wiser, but finally at peace. Sleep well, beekeeper. You've earned your rest.